Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage Methodspace, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Bernie Hogan from the Oxford Internet Institute and University of Oxford, and we're going to talk about his new book, From Social Science to Data Science. And before we have our conversation, if you are new to Methodspace, this is a blog community hosted by Sage Publishing. We're interested in everything to do with designing, conducting, analyzing research, writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the heart of this diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a brand new researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. And that's why I enjoy having the opportunity to have these kinds of conversations, because I always learn a lot. So, Bernie, why don't you begin by introducing yourself?
Hi, thank you, Janet. My name is Professor Bernie Hogan. I'm an associate professor and senior research fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. At the moment, I'm also the director of our master's program in social data science and an AI and work fellow. And I guess some of that will kind of bleed into this work, because a lot of it really is at the intersection of social science and this newfangled thing some people are calling data science, and of course the onrush of interest and excitement in AI.
Well, why don't you begin for those who aren't familiar with these terms and just define what you mean by data science, and why social scientists would use it to study different kinds of problems.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, so data science is a relatively new term, and I wouldn't be confident in saying that there's a unitary definition of a lot of different definitions depending on the perspective. In the general sense, it's somewhere in between statistics and computer science and maths, but that's data science. Now, the reality is that the data has to come from somewhere, and the insights are going to go to somewhere. And so social data science is a little more towards sociology, economics, political science, and how they, and a kind of an emerging field we'd call social computing, and how those things kind of work with the more, quantitative STEM type work. Now, that's kind of the history of who's in it, but that doesn't really tell you so much about what it is. Now, data science, or social data science, we might say, is the science of the operationalization of social life. That is, the world's just out there. It's just phenomena, and we often have to measure that phenomena some way. Now, a data scientist might take those measurements and find a way to classify them, or a way to, I don't know, use some scores for text. But in social data science, we certainly do that, but we also want to know, where does the data come from? How do we get it into that form? How do we measure, for example, what is hate speech? What is helpfulness online? What's a healthy social network? Those are often vague but important social constructs that, in order to measure when they become data, we got to think of how they become data, how we can measure it, and what sort of claims we're going to make about it.
Right. So it seemed like the quality of the data and being able to bring in data that's really going to help you to understand kind of the scope and the dimensions of those problems, and the relationships between, as you mentioned, when you talk about say hate speech, well, that ties in with values and beliefs and cultures, and what's permitted within a society, in terms of societal norms. So you have all of these different kinds of elements that come together. So finding the data that's going to help to make a clearer intersection that we can understand would seem to be one of the challenges that data scientists would have.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess one of the more popular terms within the more computational side of this now is context. How do we understand context? Where, say, if I said, I'm feeling pretty sick this morning. That might imply that, I'm not feeling very well. It would be a matter of health. If some kid comes up to me and says, yo, mate, your shoes are sick. I don't think they mean my shoes are unwell. I think they mean that they're probably cool or something like that. And I'm not sure that'd be very likely with my sneakers, but regardless, the point is context matters. So some of the simplest ways that we do this is, we just take a bunch of text or a bunch of images or something, try to quantify it in some way, and then maybe put it through a classifier or score it. But it turns out those ways are not very good because they don't have any context. It's just very, very simple. That being said, these are skills that people will want to use at scale, whether that's someone who's managing a platform, say where people talk to each other, customer analytics, people within government, generally anywhere that we want to understand some things at scale, we have to datafy it some way. So the book itself doesn't talk so much about the qualitative elements of this, although I don't want to disregard them. They're really important. We often want to get an understanding of the context where things happen. But my book itself is about those skills that we take from the data in order to make some claims about it. And it goes through kind of the core basic toolbox of skills that you would use in Python. And that's actually pretty much regardless of paradigm. Things like, what's a table? How do you get a file in? How do you merge two files or some data together? But then it goes into some more niche topics like social networks, NLP, and GIS or geographic information systems, where understanding that data or situating that data is really useful and is really important. Not just me, but me in relation to the people around me, or not just me, but me within a particular spatial location, this country versus that one, and so forth.
One of the invitations you give to readers of your book is to tinker with it and, to really use it and run the code and play with it. So, it's truly intended as a hands-on book. So I thought, maybe you could talk a little bit about, how might someone use this, that this is not a theoretical abstract book. It's do something with this kind of book. So maybe you could explain a little bit about how that might work and why you chose to do it that way.
For sure. Well, the reason to do it that way, I'll answer first, then I'll actually maybe show a little bit on the screen here. The reason to do that is because practice is really important in this area. There are a lot of skills that we need, even in the era of ChatGPT, where we might think, oh, we'll just get the chatbot to tell us what's the code that we need. You have to read the code, you have to adapt it, put it in your own framework. And also, as your skills evolve, the sort of questions that you would ask about the world evolve. As it happens, the book doesn't answer a lot of questions. There are a lot of nice statistical books out there that would, for example, take a key data set and show how someone got a great result. But this book tends to be much more lightweight in terms of the actual insights from past work, because it's meant to be more self-contained than that. And at the same time, it's really hard to do stuff that's self-contained within this world. The world of code changes. There's some code that was in the book that, depending on what version of Python you're running, it wouldn't even be up to date, which is terrifying that the book came out in January. Now, that's not to say that the book is not up to date. I taught with it just in the last month, and I really find myself, even today, I came back to it in discussion with people. It's something that I keep visiting. But in order to do that, you kind of got to get it. So perhaps it would be really helpful if I give a brief tour of some resources around the book.
Right.
I don't think that you can really get the full experience without the book itself. And that's not just a sales pitch. That's honest, because I put a lot of work into writing it, and the text isn't elsewhere. But here's how we might think about some tinkering. So here, let me share my screen here, and let's do that. And so here we have in behind me a little environment called Jupyter Lab. Now I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but this is actually the place where I wrote the whole book. I wrote it like this in this environment right here. If you double click on these things, it turns out they're not actually formatted text. They're a thing called Markdown. And then you can have in this text, but also within it, like words and or sorry, code that you can run. Now, this is a supplementary chapter. I've been adding supplementary chapters into the resources. But here we can see, let's see, what resource are we talking about? Well, I'm going to have a look over here first. And let's perhaps start from here. This is a place called GitHub. This is where people normally upload their code, and then other people can download their code. Mm-hmm. This is my GitHub homepage. We have two repositories pinned here. This is Introducing Python, and this is from Social Science to Data Science. Now, Introducing Python is not published anywhere. It's just freely available. It would be where I would start if you don't know anything about the Python programming language. But the challenge is a lot of students, certainly these days, a lot of people in the world will have some Python, they'll have tinkered around, they'll watch some videos, maybe taken an online course, and each one of those things is very bite-sized, and they don't know where to go next. And so this isn't meant to be your Intro to Python book. There's 1,000 books out there on Intro to Python. It's meant to be your second book. Once you have some of that, what do you do with it? And so that's where this one starts off. So I'll click on this.
We will include the links to these sites on Methodspace. So if you're watching this video, you'll have links that you can access these materials.
Great. Yeah, and also the URL is also in the book itself, but indeed, feel free to go there and check it out first. Now, this is the repository. It says, who's this book for? It says, you can also start with Intro to Python. And then here's what's available. Chapters, exercises, some of the data that you need for the book, or all the data that you need for the book, almost. There's one proviso there, but that's part of chapter 10, and we got you covered there. And some supplemental stuff. And here's a little bit of describing the book at a glance. I certainly won't bore the watchers with that. But if we do click on chapters, let's have a look here. These are those same kinds of notebooks. And let's have a look at this one right here called chapter 2. It's really where we start to get into the code. It's called Wrangling the Series. Now, a series is just like a collection of stuff. So that's normally where we start. Now, on GitHub, if you click on it, you can read all of the code from the book. The whole book's code is available there. Unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but the text isn't there. The text is for the book itself. So you can download these and run it. Now, trying to explain what was happening might be a bit of a challenge without the book, but indeed, we got you covered there as well. But so if we go over here, I actually have it. It's every one of the chapters. We have talk-throughs on YouTube right here. And these talk-throughs walk through slides that go through the key points of the book, and I run the code and kind of go through it and I navigate. The slides themselves, a version of those are available through the Sage publisher site. Also through that site are multiple choice chapter or multiple choice questions for each of the chapters. But if you go click on one, we get advertisements or whatever and that sort of thing, which I'm sure I have to click through for that, but you can kind of get a feel for it. Now, the point behind that is that if you're watching this sort of stuff, and you can see, I don't know where I kind of flip through some of the code here in this, but what you would do is be able to go through the code yourself and run it yourself as you're either watching or certainly reading the book along the way. Now, getting all that stuff, getting Jupyter, might seem a bit of an overhead. Certainly coming from social science, we have a culture in social science that's certainly within the quantitative stuff tends to be locked away in like little software programs like SPSS or Stata, and no one really uses those outside of social sciences anymore. Everyone's moved on, and one of the reasons they've moved on is because things like the language R, which is pretty common, and Python, which is the most common programming language, they're freely available. So you can just run all this yourself. You can do all of this for free, except, I guess, the book, to buy that. But yeah, you can see all this code on GitHub. In fact, you can even launch the code yourself and make a runnable copy with these little buttons at the top. See these opening collab? Now this right here, if you have a Google account, of course it wasn't authored by Google, you can run this right away yourself live. You don't even need to download any new apps as long as you have a Google account. But and there you can see this is the code it's running, and we can display it and so forth. So all of that together is meant to be a kind of a guided experience on people to show them some practical tools for how to wrangle data, which is a really important thing, how to visualize and analyze data. And that's what we do in I guess really chapter 9, the visualization chapter. And then how to think about some of the core social science skills in this. Now, for what it's worth, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not much of a statistician, to be honest. This is not a book that's overwhelmed with formula. A lot of these books you'll come to, before you even get to any code, you'll see a lot of formulas. Sigma this, x to the sub I over xn, and is the product of. And I find that that's a bit intimidating for a lot of people. By contrast, tinkering is entirely available. This L weekdays and this S weekdays, what do these mean? What if I delete that there? I get an error. It'll say, weekdays not defined. And you can start to get a feel for how you might go about doing this yourself without that kind of pre-overhead. To think that programming is more like cooking or like crafting than it actually is like math or stats. It's about these sort of repetitive instructions that you want to generalize from, how you take the things like the ingredients that come in and the food that comes out, and the systematic processes that you need to do in order to get there. So in this, I want to make it somewhat friendly to a social science audience, but also accessible. And asking people to buy or download Stata or buy or download SPSS just to get started on analyzing some data doesn't seem very fair at all, when we can just teach these skills and give them material that's pretty much mostly free, except for books, which cost money because you got to print the paper and ship them around the world.
Well, and writers do need to get paid just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. This is not a book that one makes for the money in that regard.
Well, I love seeing the range of materials and the hands-on practice that you offer to people. So, it would seem to me that this would be a valuable, I hate to even say just book, but, kind of a whole body of work that someone could use who, wants to develop some of these skills on their own. Maybe you are already doing research, or you're already a programmer, but now you want to take it to the next notch, that it could be a valuable self-study or used in, say a small seminar, or, with a team, outside of academia, as well as in the classroom, would be very helpful for the professor to have access to such a range of activities, shall we say, with the being able to play with the code and the tinker part of it, and then also with your YouTube materials. So, how do you see people using this, or who would be the best audience for the book?
Well, the book itself is actually derived from a course, and that course. I said I'm the course director for this master's in social data science. Well, the master's in social data science actually grew out of a course in like computational social science we did here at the Oxford Internet Institute, and that grew out of a need. So I've been teaching at this department now for a good 15 years. And the first year of teaching, it became evident that students wanted to do things with online data, maybe download data from Twitter or Facebook or other places. And say, well, how do you do this? And there are apps that you can use for a very specific way of downloading data, but it's not very general purpose. And the students' needs were always just a little bit off-road from just like the set menu, press the Twitter downloader, and out comes the data. Or even if they did that, then they had the data and they don't know really what to do with it.
Now what do you do with it?
So Yeah, so we first started a course in Python for social science students, and these are people who wouldn't have come up with, a computer science, math, stats background, but they're generally smart, eager to learn,
Mhm.
patient, and we taught that course. It turns out that this sort of field got pretty big. We developed a whole master's around it.
Mhm.
So this book has evolved as the first course of that master's. And the course is called, it's a bit lofty for a title for a book, but
Mhm.
it's called The Fundamentals of Social Data Science. So
Mhm.
this is, your cutting edge, bleeding edge things.
Mhm.
These are some really well-worn concepts that I've
Right.
taught now for, gosh, over 10 years of these concepts. And
Mhm.
we also, um, I don't necessarily want to toot my own horn, but I want to
Mhm.
suggest that it's not just the code, it's the way you unfold the things you need to learn. Because
Mhm.
where do I start? Well, that's part of
Right.
it. You start at the beginning of the book. And the second is the kind of the missteps, oh, I always make this mistake, or I never quite get that.
Mhm.
Over the years, I've been able to embed those into my lessons, which have become the book. And so
Right.
there's a lot of things. Well, let's just say I know I'm doing all right with it because when I gave these lectures on YouTube, I might talk about something that I think I'm not sure if it's coming up or not. I say, this is really important for you to know. And it might be on the next slide. I'm like, oh, of course, because I've been there.
Mhm.
I've seen that happen before. And I just like now that I can anticipate a lot of the main challenges that people come up with when they're learning this stuff and have kind of a guide or direction for those main challenges.
Right.
So how would you use it? Well, I would start by picking up the book and going to the YouTube videos first off, because the YouTube videos
Mhm.
show you how to get the Jupyter Lab set up, how to download all the
Mhm.
code yourself, and it can be used for direct self-study. For a class in like a senior undergraduate, third or fourth year undergraduate class, we might think that each chapter would represent a
Mhm.
week's
Mhm.
lesson. So this would
Mhm.
be like maybe a full term course. You can do it more accelerated than that, but I wouldn't want to rush it. I think it's important
Mhm.
to be comfortable with the material. And I also want to suggest it's important to check in with the GitHub. Now, GitHub, again, it's not super common in the social sciences, but there's a reason why people use it in the technical
Mhm.
sciences.
Mhm.
Sometimes code breaks through no fault of your own. That is, maybe the Python language has updated, so it no longer allows something that it used to allow. And that happens.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so GitHub is a place where I can continually update
Mhm.
the if I was to update it substantively, that would be a different book. But it's not
Right.
that. It's just when an instructor comes to the book, if they're trying to teach that lesson, they need to know that there's not bugs in there, or
Mhm.
that if there is some new change in Python, that they don't have to spend an evening trying to figure out how to make my code work. And so if it was just like an archive that was tucked away two
Right.
years ago,
Right. Right.
hard to do that. But
Right.
if I'm updating the book every, different chapter one week or another
Mhm.
month, fine tuning it, and then also checking on the issue tracker. If people go in and say, "Hey, this doesn't work in your code," I can modify that. So it
Mhm.
becomes kind of a living document, and that's the way we
Right.
really have to treat this stuff. Because with generative AI and so many other new things coming out, it is an area where there's like continual new stuff. So
Mhm.
hopefully these can provide the skills so that you
Mhm.
become literate in how to do the new stuff
Mhm.
without too much of the overhead to get you there.
Right. Right. Well, certainly for the people who are fortunate enough to have the opportunity to study at the Oxford Internet Institute and, are at the point in life where getting the master's uh, degree would be beneficial, they have the opportunity to learn from you, but it's almost like with this book and collection of materials, anyone can have that opportunity to learn and benefit from your teaching experience. I mean, as someone who formerly taught and then wrote books, when I write my books, it's like I'm writing to my students, for my former students. I'm thinking about the questions they had, the dilemmas they had, the places where they got stuck, the places where, as you say, you know, things change while you're in the middle of doing something, and how do you stay, you know, flexible about that. So this seems like a great opportunity. And thank you for showing those examples, so you know, folks can have a sense of kind of the scope that's offered. Before we close, just it was fun in our exchange and getting acquainted to find that you have a passion for vinyl records, which I also enjoy. And when I'm not on the keyboard, I'm writing with the fountain pen. I have a million, and it's a passion of mine. So thinking, here we have two digital people with internet research and immersed in all of that, but you know, find a place for the analog, the really hands-on analog things. So you know, what, how do you find that place for the analog important in our digital infused lives?
Oh, I mean, there's so many ways you can answer that. And like a true academic, I have to defer first to the fact that I wrote a paper on it. So in the first issue of the journal Social Media Plus Society, which I think is a Sage journal, I have a short piece in there called Mixing in Social Media, where I talk about how we could think about vinyl records as a medium, as a social medium, not just as like a record. But I mean, that's part of it. Just the other day, I was at the record store and I'm chatting with people, talking about which records they're interested in, and these are this is one of these, you know, niche ones in London, and it's nice to be able to give them really specific questions. I get responses back. It feels very social. Someone comes in like, "Hey, I was, you know, wanted to check out this record." It's very hands-on, and that hands-onness, that imminence, was lost from digital. I did use digital stuff before. I would DJ with a Tractor, and which is, you know, it's on the Mac or PC, controllers and stuff. But I don't I don't like it at home. That seems like it's a very dedicated strapping into the DJ-ness. And now I have two turntables, and I've been able to, I guess, kind of like with that book there, I want to get back to the fundamentals of mixing, which is what's the basic stuff? How do you listen to whether two songs are in sync? How do you kind of get a feel for that? And you can let the computer sync the songs for you, but they always sync in the same way. And similarly, you could just ask ChatGPT for, give me some Python code to do a thing. And it'll always kind of give you the same kind of code. It won't explain to you what it's done. You'll never develop your feeling for how to put the code together by doing that. And go to any DJ forum online and they'll say, mix without the sync button. Try doing it on vinyl. Develop your ear for it. You can go back afterwards and you'll find it so much easier. But find those fundamental skills where you're getting really into it, getting hands-on, get practice in there. And that's just what I like in my I guess my off life as well, being able to just get in there, do the basics of it, get really good at that, and really feel like I'm a part of it rather than I'm just along for the computer's ride.
Right. Well, and you started in the conversation talking about data science, mentioning the importance of context. And, you know, one of the things that I find so interesting in the vinyl that in my life that was collected by, you know, former, you know, fan of jazz and blues and you know, some of these recordings that, you know, would have never been done by, you know, a major studio that was trying to sell like a zillion copies of something. And so, you know, they kind of embody this cultural context. And, you know, your example of being in the record shop, you know, that other kind of social that's more happenstance and coincidental and might involve actual like eye contact and, you know, touching things is I think, you know, we're still humans on the other side of the monitor. And so, you know, it's fun to do that. I mean, I just last week taught a class in a local art store called Hands-on Fountain Pens. I've been teaching this for several years, and it's always full. So, clearly, we still need that in our lives. So I guess, encourage people not to, don't give up on the human side of life and the joys that we get from some of those other kinds of activities.
And don't take data for face value. It's always an encoding of something.
Mm-hmm.
MP3 is the same MP3 that everyone gets, but that record is yours. It smells, it has a dent, it might have a scratch, it has a sound to it, it has a history to it.
Mm-hmm.
What we encode from our world is not everything. And so if we're more attentive to the world, more in tune to it, we can think about what things we want to encode better rather than just take a toy data set and say that is the data. In order to critique that data, we got to think what's behind it. And just like with other material things, just with writing, what's behind it. On that point, I'm a left-handed person. So it's quite a challenge for me. And that's another form of materiality we just got to confront.
Right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And I hope that our Methodspace readers will find this interesting and help them to, get a sense of what they might find from the book and collection of materials.
Well, thank you.